Everyone in Manhattan feared Lorenzo Cattaneo. They feared his name, his lawyers, his bodyguards, and the silence that walked into a room 10 seconds before he did. They feared the way he listened, the way he didn't blink when he heard bad news, the way he could end your life with the same tone he used to order espresso. The Cattaneo family had ruled the East Coast underworld for 3 generations, but Lorenzo had ruled it differently. Colder, smarter, hungrier. By the time he was 34, every other family in 5 boroughs had stopped trying to challenge him, because the men who tried did not come home, and their wives did not press for answers. That was the kind of fear Lorenzo Cattaneo lived inside. And that was the world he believed he understood, the night a 6-year-old girl walked up to his dining table and whispered, "Don't eat that, sir." He didn't know yet that the woman who had brought her into his house, silent, polite, almost invisible, was the same woman he had buried in his memory 7 years earlier. He didn't know yet that the little girl had her mother's eyes, and he didn't know yet that those eyes had also, once, in another life, belonged to him. By the time he understood any of it, 3 people would be dead, his empire would be cracking like a wineglass squeezed in a fist, and the only woman he had ever loved would be standing in his bedroom in the dark with the point of a blade pressed against the soft place under his ribs, asking him a question he had never learned how to answer. But that came later. This is how it began. The brownstone on East 73rd Street did not look like the kind of place where men disappeared. It looked like the kind of place where money lived quietly. 5 stories of cream-colored stone, black iron railings, a polished mahogany door that opened only for people whose names existed on a list Lorenzo personally maintained. Inside, the house smelled the way old money smells in New York: leather, cedar, faint smoke from the library fireplace, the ghost of espresso cups in the morning. Tomas, the head of his security, lived on the ground floor in a room beside the kitchen. The 3rd floor belonged to Lorenzo. The 2nd floor was offices and a study where he made the kind of phone calls that ended other people's empires. The 4th and 5th floors were guest suites and quarters for the live-in staff, of whom there were always 7, never more, never less. Lorenzo did not like crowds inside his walls. He liked silence. He liked control. And he liked the particular silence of women who had been trained to fold towels in the way his mother had folded them, who knew how to walk past a man without ever quite being seen. That was, until Arya. She arrived on a Tuesday in October, when the city smelled like rain and roasting chestnuts, and Lorenzo was in Lisbon brokering a deal that had taken 4 months to set up. She came with paperwork that his consigliere, Rixai, had personally vetted twice. She came with a recommendation from a woman who had served the Cattaneo family for 19 years before retiring to Naples. She came with a quiet daughter who held her hand the way some children hold a rope above a long fall. And she came with a name Lorenzo had no reason to recognize, because 7 years ago, when he had known her, she had not been called Arya. To understand how she came to be standing on his doorstep that Tuesday, you have to go back 4 months. To a small white kitchen in a small white house on a hillside in Calabria, where a woman named Elena was washing a teacup at 6 in the evening, and a man she had not seen in 23 years was sitting at her kitchen table, holding her daughter's drawing in his hand. His name was Vincenzo Marchetti. He was 63 years old tall, and had stopped being beautiful around the time he had stopped being merciful. His hands were old hands now, with the small brown spots that come on the back of the hand at his age, but his eyes had not aged. His eyes were the same eyes Arya remembered, a single time, from when she was 11, leaning over a railing on a ferry in Sicily, watching a man in a black coat speak to her mother and then walk away. She had asked her mother who he was. Her mother had said, "Nobody." Her mother had been wiping her own face with the back of her wrist when she said it. That night, in her own kitchen, with her daughter asleep upstairs, Arya stood with her back to the sink and felt the cold porcelain of a teacup in her wet hand, and watched a stranger turn over a child's crayon drawing of a yellow sun. "She has talent," Marchetti said. "She draws inside the lines. That comes from the mother. Discipline, your mother was the same." She did not answer. She did not move. "I have looked for you for 7 years," he said. "I want you to understand the cost of that, the men I have used, the favors I have spent. I want you to understand that what I am about to tell you I have paid for." You have nothing to tell me. Your father's name, he said, is on a piece of paper in a safe in Salerno. The man who signed your birth certificate was your mother's husband for 2 years. He was not your father. I am your father. Sit down. She did not sit down. She set the teacup very carefully in the dish rack. She turned. She looked at him. Get out of my house, she said. He smiled. It was not a smile of pleasure. It was the smile of a man arranging a chess piece he had been holding in his palm for a long time. Lorenzo Cattaneo, he said. She did not flinch. She had spent 7 years not flinching at that name. She had practiced. But Marchetti, who had spent his life reading the faces of people who had practiced, watched her throat. He saw the small thing he was looking for. I know about him, he said. I know you were placed beside him in Naples by my brother when you were 23 years old. I know my brother died before he could tell you who you were. I know you found out anyway, 3 months in from your mother, who, I should tell you, is also alive, also in a small white house, also waiting for me to come home and tell her how this conversation went. I know you faked your death to keep the boy you loved from coming for you. I know you have raised his daughter for 7 years in this house, and I know you have done it well. I am here to tell you, Alina, that you are a Marchetti, and that the time has come for the family to use you. She said nothing. In 4 months, he said, you are going to walk into the brownstone of Lorenzo Cattaneo. You are going to take a position as a housekeeper. You are going to become, in his eyes, invisible. You are going to learn his routines. You are going to wait for my signal. And on the night I give you the signal, you are going to put a blade between his ribs while he sleeps. You are going to do this for 2 reasons. One is that I will pay you after the kind of money that will let you raise our daughter, your daughter, our blood, in a country where I will never find either of you again. The second reason is the harder one to hear, so listen carefully. He stood up. He set the drawing back on the table, very gently, the yellow sun face up. If you refuse, he said, or if you run, or if you warn him, or if you fail, I will take your daughter. I will take her tomorrow, or in a year, or in 5 years, but I will take her. And I will raise her the way my father raised me. Do you understand what that means? She understood. He came around the table. He stopped 6 feet from her. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice in his entire life. That was why people had been afraid of him. Tell me you understand. I understand. Good, he said. Pack tonight. The plane leaves Naples on Friday. Mrs. DeLuca's recommendation has already been sent. Your name when you arrive will be Aria Morty. The daughter keeps her name. He paused at the kitchen doorway. He did not turn his head. He will not recognize you, Alina. 7 years is a long time, and you have learned, I think, to look at the world like someone other than the girl he loved. That is the only thing in your favor. He closed the door behind him. She stood at the sink for a long time. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of a man in 20 years, and she had no intention of starting now. When she had stopped trembling enough to use her hands, she took down a steel knife from the magnet strip on the wall, a small, sharp paring knife, the one she used to peel apples for Sophia in the morning, and she wrapped it in a dish towel and put it in the bottom of her suitcase. She did not know then why. She would understand 4 months later. That was Calabria. That was June. By October, she was a woman named Aria Morty standing on the steps of a brownstone in New York with a single suitcase and her daughter's hand in hers, and the man who let her in was not Lorenzo. The man who let her in was Rixai. He was a small man, balding, soft-spoken, lethal. He took her coat and her resume and said in his careful, slightly amused way, "You understand what kind of household this is?" "I do," she said. "You understand what it means, if you bring trouble inside it." She looked at him. "I bring my daughter, Mr. Rixai. I do not bring trouble." He studied her for a long moment. Something flickered in him. He was tired. The city was loud. 4 other interviews waited that week, and the previous housekeeper had retired without notice. He wrote her name into the book and showed her the staircase to the 4th floor, where her room and her daughter's room shared a small connecting door. She thanked him. She unpacked 2 suitcases. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed for an hour without moving. And when her daughter, Sophia, came in and asked if this was their new home, Aria said, "For now." Sophia was 6 years old and small for her age. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's stillness, but the eyes were not her mother's. They were a strange, pale gray, the color of weathered slate, the color of a sky just before snow. Anyone who had ever met Lorenzo Cattaneo would have recognized those eyes. None of the staff in that house had met him often enough to make the connection. Not yet. Sophia was, on most days, the kind of child Arya had trained her to be: quiet, watchful, polite to strangers. On other days, Sophia was 6. On the third afternoon in the brownstone, she walked into the laundry room where her mother was folding pillowcases and announced, with the gravity of a small judge, that she was running away to live in the park because Mrs. Halloran had taken her drawing of the cat off the refrigerator and put up a different drawing by a different child who did not even live in the house. Arya, holding a half-folded pillowcase, asked which child. Sophia said, "I don't know her name. She's stupid." She drew a horse, but it looks like a dog. Arya had to put the pillowcase down and turn her face toward the wall for a moment, because she had not, in 7 years, allowed herself to laugh in front of her daughter at small, ordinary, unimportant things, and the small, unimportant thing that her daughter had become a person who had opinions about other people's horses had hit her, suddenly, like a wave. She bent down. She put the cat drawing back on the refrigerator, on top of the horse dog. She told Sophia that the park in October was very cold, and that she would freeze in her stockings. Sophia, mollified, ate 2 cookies and forgot about running away. That was the kind of child Sophia was on the days when her mother let her be a child. Lorenzo returned from Lisbon 11 days later. It was past midnight when his car pulled up to the brownstone. Tomas opened the door. Rixai waited in the foyer with 2 glasses already poured. The house was dark except for the small reading lamp in the hallway upstairs, and Lorenzo, walking past the second-floor landing with his coat still on his shoulders, glanced up automatically, the way a man checks his own perimeters before sleeping. That was when he saw her. She was at the top of the staircase, carrying a folded stack of linen. She had stopped mid-step, as if the air had caught her. From 3 flights below in shadow, she should have been a shape, an outline, a piece of the household furniture. She was not. Lorenzo Cattaneo, who had not been surprised by another human being in 9 years, felt a small, cold sensation pass through the back of his neck, the kind of sensation he had taught himself to trust as a young man, before he had learned how to ignore it. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her, and she looked back at him, and for a single, suspended second, neither of them moved. Then she lowered her gaze, the way servants do, and continued up the stairs. "New," Lorenzo said. 3 weeks, Rixai answered. "Housekeeper, the daughter is hers, they live on 4, quiet, excellent references. Mrs. DeLuca recommended her from Naples." Lorenzo said. He did not say anything else about her. He went upstairs, took off his coat, drank his glass of grappa, and went to bed. But that night, for the first time in years, he did not sleep well. He dreamed of rain on a balcony in Naples, of a woman laughing into the curve of his shoulder, of a small bottle of cheap wine they had passed between them like a secret. He dreamed of a name he had stopped saying out loud. And when he woke, at 4 in the morning, the sweat cold on his forehead, he could not remember exactly why. Arya made breakfast in the kitchen the next morning at 5:30. She did not see Lorenzo. He took his coffee in his study and left the house at 6:45, and she watched him go from the laundry room window without letting any part of her body move. She watched the way his coat moved across his shoulders when he walked. She watched the small pause he took at the curb, the angle of his jaw turning just slightly back toward the door before he stepped into the car. She watched, and her hand, holding a folded sheet, did not tremble, because she had spent 4 months training her hands not to tremble. But the rest of her, on the inside, was a city in collapse. That night, after the house had quieted, she did a thing she would do every night for the next 11 nights. She locked her door. She knelt beside her bed. She lifted the floorboard in the corner. Sophia's room had a loose one, a stupid place to hide anything, but it was the place she had, and she took out the small object she had wrapped in a dish towel 4 months earlier in a kitchen in Calabria, the paring knife. She unwrapped it. She held it in her open palm, blade across her fingers, weighing nothing. She looked at it for a long time. Then she wrapped it again, returned it to its place under the floor, and lay down on her bed in her clothes and stared at the ceiling and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They did not, on most nights. She had stopped expecting them to. Sophia did not know about the knife. Sophia knew about the maid. The cook's assistant was a young woman named Camille Reyes. She had been in the house only 2 weeks longer than Arya. She was 26, pretty in a brittle way, with a thin smile and very careful manners. She had come from an agency Rixai had used twice before. Her references were spotless. Her cooking was excellent, and she had, in those first 2 weeks, done nothing that anyone could remember. Sophia did not like her. Sophia did not say so out loud, because Sophia was a child whose mother had taught her, very young, that there are some thoughts you carry in your stomach and not in your mouth. But Arya, who knew her daughter the way a sniper knows a wind, could read it in the angle of Sophia's shoulders whenever Camille walked into a room. Sophia would go very still. Her small hands would settle in her lap. Her gray eyes would track Camille around the kitchen the way a cat tracks a moving wire. The first time Arya noticed it, a Wednesday, 4 days after she had arrived in the house, she crouched beside her daughter in the back hallway and said softly, in Italian, "Cara, what is it?" Sophia did not look at her. "She smells like the man." "What man?" "The man at the train station, in Naples, the one who watched us last summer. He smelled like cigarettes and something sweet, cheap perfume, like flowers that aren't real. She smells the same." Arya's breath did not change. Her hand on Sophia's small shoulder did not tighten. But behind her face, something cold and very old slid into place. "Are you sure?" "Mama, I'm not stupid." It came out small and a little angry, the way it comes out of a 6-year-old who has been told to be quiet for too long. Arya almost laughed. Almost. She put both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "I know you're not stupid, baby. You're the least stupid person in this house. Listen to me. You don't tell anyone but me. Do you remember what we said about that?" "I tell only you." That's right, baby." She kissed her daughter's forehead. She stood up. She went back to folding linens, and her face was composed and gentle, and inside her chest her heart was hitting her ribs like a fist hitting a door. The next morning, she made a phone call from a pharmacy on Lexington. She used a phone she had bought in cash on the corner of 81st, the day after she had arrived. She called a number that was supposed to be used only in catastrophe. A man answered on the second ring. He did not say his name. She did not say hers. "There is another player on the board," she said. A pause. Position. Inside the house. Kitchen staff, female, mid-20s. "Yours?" "No." The pause this time was longer. "Then whose?" "I don't know yet. Possibly Marchetti." "Acceptable. Continue your timeline." "I want it pushed." "Negative." "I have a reason." "Then we will discuss it on schedule. Continue your timeline. End of call." She closed the phone. She stood on the corner with her face tilted toward a brick wall so that no one could read her expression. She wanted to throw the phone into traffic. She wanted, with a sudden, clarifying intensity, to walk back to the brownstone, take her daughter by the hand, and run. She wanted to do almost anything other than what she was about to do, which was to go back to that house and continue to fold linens for a man she had once loved badly enough to die for, while waiting for the day when she would be required to put a knife between his ribs. She went back to the house. She folded the linens. She watched Camille raise the way a hawk watches a smaller, stupider bird. And on the 8th day after Lorenzo's return from Lisbon, on a cold, blue Friday evening, the household sat down to a private dinner that he was hosting for Don Vincenz, Marchetti, and his consigliere. And that was the night the little girl walked into the dining room with her hands behind her back and saved a man's life. Lorenzo had told no one outside his immediate circle that the dinner was happening. The fact that the maid Camille had known to be ready meant that someone inside his circle had told her. The fact that the food had been poisoned meant that someone wanted Lorenzo dead enough to risk a war. And the fact that the only person who saw it coming was a 6-year-old girl meant that someone in that house had eyes more careful than his bodyguards, more careful than his consiglieres, more careful than his own. Don Marchetti arrived at 7. The two families had been at peace for 9 years. They had not always been at peace, and both men in that dining room knew that the peace was a marriage of convenience, not affection, and was held together by territory agreements that had to be renegotiated every January. This dinner in October was unusual. Marchetti had requested it. Lorenzo had granted it. The chess piece Marchetti had moved into the brownstone was the Maid. The chess piece Lorenzo had not yet identified was Arya. The chess piece neither of them had identified yet was the third one, the one that had been sitting in the kitchen of the brownstone for 19 years, waiting. The table was set for 4. Mrs. Halloran was in the kitchen. Camille was plating the antipasto. Arya was upstairs, putting Sophia to bed. The protocol in this house was that no one above the level of housekeeper served at private dinners. That was kitchen work. Arya therefore had no business being on the first floor. She would not have come down at all, except that Sophia, on her bed in her small striped pajamas, sat up in the middle of her storybook and said, very quietly, "Mama." The lady made the food different tonight. Arya's hand stopped on the page. "What do you mean, different?" "I saw her in the kitchen this morning. She was holding a little bottle. She put it in her pocket." "What kind of little bottle?" Sophia held up her thumb and forefinger about an inch apart. "Brown glass, like the one Nana used to carry." Arya sat very still for a moment. Then she stood up. She closed the book. She kissed her daughter's forehead. She said in Italian, the language that was her daughter's secret, "Cara, I want you to come downstairs with me. I want you to do something brave." Sophia did not ask why. She put on her slippers. She held out her hand. They went down the back staircase together. On the second-floor landing, Arya stopped. She crouched in front of her daughter. She put her hands on her daughter's small shoulders. She said in a steady, clear voice, "When we get to the dining room, you are going to walk to the man with the dark hair and the silver watch. You are going to walk past everyone else. You are not going to look at the woman serving the food. You are going to put your hand on his arm, very gentle. And you are going to say, 'Don't eat that, sir.' And then you are going to step back and you are going to come stand behind me and you are not going to say one more word. Can you do that?" Sophia looked into her mother's face. She nodded. "I'm not afraid," she said. In that moment, her gray eyes, Lorenzo's eyes, were the eyes of a child who had been raised, very carefully, by someone who had not let fear into the room. They walked into the dining room at 7:34. The door from the back hallway opened directly onto the long, dark walnut table. Lorenzo was seated at the head, his back to the fireplace. Marchetti was across from him. The 2 consiglieres were on either side. Camille was just lowering the silver dome over the entree when Arya stepped through the doorway, holding her daughter's hand. Tomas, posted by the door, took half a step forward and stopped, because Arya's eyes met his and Arya's eyes said, "Hold." He hesitated. He held. Lorenzo looked up. The girl detached from her mother and walked across the carpet. She walked the way her mother had taught her to walk, straight, soft, no hurry. She stopped beside Lorenzo's chair. She placed her small hand on his sleeve, on the inside of his forearm just below the elbow, the gentlest possible touch. She looked up at him with her gray eyes. "Don't eat that, sir," she said. The room stopped. It is hard to describe the particular silence that falls in a room of dangerous men when a child does something they did not predict. It is not the silence of confusion. It is the silence of recalibration. Lorenzo, who had been about to lift his fork, did not lift his fork. He did not move his arm. He did not look at the maid. He looked for a long second into the eyes of the small girl beside him, and something in his chest moved in a way it had not moved in a very long time. He did not, then, understand why. Across the table, Marchetti's eyes went, for a single instant, to the doorway, to Arya, the smallest possible tightening of skin at the corner of his eye. Lorenzo, who was not looking at Marchetti, did not see it. Arya saw it. She saw the precise instant her father understood that she had betrayed him. She saw what it cost to keep her face blank. Camille Reyes set the silver dome on the side table. She smiled, a small, careful smile, and said in her bright agency voice, "I'm so sorry, sir. The child has come down by mistake. Let me." "Don't," Lorenzo said. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look at her. "Don't move." She froze. Arya walked across the carpet then. She came to the side of her daughter. She did not speak. She put one hand on Sophia's shoulder. With her other hand she did, in front of all of them, a small, very clean thing. She picked up the linen napkin beside Lorenzo's plate, folded it once, and laid it gently over the entree, a piece of seared veal in a dark sauce. Then she stepped back, eyes lowered, and waited. "Tomas," Lorenzo said. "Boss." "Take her downstairs." He nodded just slightly toward Camille. "The maid." Tomas crossed the room in 4 steps. He was not gentle, he was not rough, he was efficient. 2 of the bodyguards posted in the hall took her from him at the door. The footsteps moved away down the back staircase. Lorenzo had not moved. Don Marchetti, across the table, had become very still. "Vincenzo," Lorenzo said, still without looking at him, "eat your veal." Marchetti's face did not change. "Lorenzo," he said, "I have no appetite tonight." "I insist." "I do not eat veal." "You did," Lorenzo said. "Last August, at the Cattaneo wedding. You had 2 helpings and complained that the chef was Sicilian." The silence after that was not the silence of a child. It was the silence of 2 animals who have understood, at exactly the same moment, that the cage door is open. What happened next took 6 seconds. When it was over, Marchetti was alive, but his bodyguard was not. His consigliere was on his knees with his hands behind his head, and Marchetti himself was sitting at the dining table with a thin line of blood at the corner of his mouth from where Tomas had returned to the room and struck him once, very precisely, with the back of a hand. Lorenzo had still not moved from his chair. He had still not lifted his fork. He turned his head, finally, toward the woman and the child standing at the side of his chair. "Madam," he said. His voice was the voice he used for negotiations. Low, even, clean. "Would you mind explaining to me how my 6-year-old houseguest knew what was on my plate?" Arya did not raise her eyes. "She saw something this morning, sir, in the kitchen." "Saw what?" "A bottle in Camille's apron." Lorenzo looked down at the small girl beside him. The small girl looked back. He saw her eyes. He really saw them, perhaps, for the first time. Something in him noted the color, the shape, the steadiness, and filed it for a question he did not yet know how to ask. "What is your name?" he said to her. "Sophia," she said. She paused, looked at the silver dome on the side table, looked back up at him, and added in a tone of tremendous 6-year-old indignation, "She was going to make you sick. She is a bad lady. I don't like her." It was the first thing in the room that did not sound rehearsed. Lorenzo, who had been ready for many things, was not ready for that. The corner of his mouth did something it had not done in 9 years. It almost moved. "Yes," he said gravely. "She is, in fact, a very bad lady. Thank you, Sophia. You are a very brave young lady. Will you go upstairs now with my friend Tomas?" Sophia looked at her mother. Her mother nodded once. Sophia took Tomas's hand. He led her out of the room. The door closed. Lorenzo stood up from the table. "Vincenzo," he said, "we are going to walk down to the basement together. You and we are going to have a conversation about the woman in my kitchen, and then we are going to have a separate conversation about whether you and I will see Christmas on your feet." "Lorenzo," Marchetti said. His voice, for the first time, was very small and very careful. "Lorenzo, listen to me. There are things you do not know about this house. There are things in this house that have been waiting for you since before you were born. If you put me in a basement tonight, you will not survive what is left in your kitchen." It was the truest thing Marchetti said in his life. Lorenzo heard it. Lorenzo did not then understand it. "On your feet," Lorenzo said. They went downstairs. Arya stayed in the dining room for a long, still moment. The candles on the table had burned down by perhaps an inch. The veal sat under its napkin like a small, polite grave. She looked at it for a long second. Then she walked, calmly, back through the kitchen and up the stairs to her daughter's room. In the kitchen, as she passed, she met the eyes of Mrs. Halloran. Mrs. Halloran was a soft, white-haired Irish woman of about 60 who had been in that kitchen for 19 years. She had baked Sophia bread 3 times that week. She had tucked a small flower print apron around Arya's waist on the second morning and called her dear. She was, by every account, the kindest person in the house. Arya looked at her in that moment for 1 second longer than a passing glance. Mrs. Halloran was drying her hands on a dish towel. Mrs. Halloran smiled. It was not a kind smile. Arya, who had spent 4 months in her own kitchen in Calabria practicing how to recognize a kind smile from its opposite, knew the difference. She did not stop walking. She did not change her face. But on the back staircase on the way up to the 4th floor, she took out her cell phone and texted, to a number that was not in the phone's address book, 4 numbers and a single word. The numbers were the time. The word was Halloran. The number she texted was Mrs. DeLuca's. Mrs. DeLuca had not retired to Naples. Mrs. DeLuca was sitting in a small kitchen in Astoria, Queens, that night, watching the 11 o'clock news. Mrs. DeLuca had lied about retiring 19 years earlier when Lorenzo's mother had asked her to lie. Mrs. DeLuca had been Lorenzo's mother's closest friend, and Lorenzo's mother had died in 2006, having extracted 3 promises from her. The third of those promises was that, if Elena Marchetti, whom Lorenzo's mother had met once, in Naples, the summer Lorenzo had loved her, ever surfaced again, Mrs. DeLuca was to find a way to bring her into Lorenzo's house. Mrs. DeLuca had been the handler at the other end of every phone call Arya had made for 4 months. Mrs. DeLuca was the reason Arya had been placed at all. She had intercepted Marchetti's plan in June and replaced his real handler with herself, so that every report Arya thought she was giving to her father was, in fact, going to a small kitchen in Queens. Mrs. DeLuca read the text. She closed her phone. She picked up a different phone, one she had not used in 2 years. She called a man she had known for 31 years. "It's me," she said. "Halloran is the 3rd asset. Tell Lorenzo, tonight." Arya did not know any of that then. Arya thought she was alone. She climbed the stairs to her daughter's room with her phone in her hand and the back of her neck cold, and she did not yet understand that the only thing that had kept her alive for 4 months was a 68-year-old woman in Queens who had loved Lorenzo's mother. Not yet. He came at 1 in the morning. He had, by then, spent 4 hours in the basement with Don Marchetti. Marchetti was alive, but no longer dangerous. Camille Reyes had also been in the basement for those 4 hours, and she had told Lorenzo, in the end, 3 things. That Marchetti had paid her $200,000, that the contact who had recruited her had been a man with a Genoa accent, and that there was someone else in the house who had been recruited by the same network long before her and was waiting to act if both other plays failed. She did not know that person's name. She had only been told that they would be female, that they had been in position for many years, and that they were considered the family's last and most reliable instrument. By the time Lorenzo walked up the back staircase to the 4th floor, he believed he knew who the other player was. He believed it because he had spent the 4 hours in that basement watching, in his head, the small, precise way Arya Morty had folded a linen napkin over a poisoned plate. He believed it because he had remembered the way she had stood in the doorway of his dining room, holding her daughter's hand, with her face composed in the exact stillness he had, in his life, only ever seen on professionals. He believed it because, somewhere in the back of his brain, between hour 3 and hour 4, while Camille was sobbing on the basement floor, he had finally remembered where he had seen that stillness before. Naples, a balcony, rain. He stood outside the door of her room on the 4th floor for almost a full minute before he knocked. She opened it before his knuckles touched the wood. She was wearing the same black house dress. Her hair was down now, around her shoulders. She was barefoot. The hallway light fell across her cheekbone and down her throat, and Lorenzo Cattaneo, who had not been afraid of any human being in 19 years, felt fear move through him like cold water. "Arya," he said. She looked at him. She did not speak. "That isn't the name." "No." "Say it, say the name." Her mouth moved before any sound came out. Then, "Elena." He closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them, he did not look like Lorenzo Cattaneo. He looked like a younger man, a man she had known on a balcony in Naples, a man whose face she had memorized in a hotel bed 23 days before she had let him think he had buried her. "You drowned," he said. "No." I paid a man 50,000 euros. I saw there was a photograph." "I know, I let you." "Why?" "Lorenzo." "Why?" His voice broke in the middle of the word. She had not, in 9 years of knowing him, ever heard his voice break. She put her hand over her mouth. "Because I was pregnant," she said. "And the same week I knew it, I found out who my father was. Lorenzo, you know who he is. I learned 3 months in. I was sent to you in Naples. I didn't know I was being sent. The man who placed me, my mother's brother, he died before he could tell me what I was for. By the time I knew, I couldn't." Stop, slow down. "I couldn't keep her," she said. Her hand was still over her mouth and she was talking through it. "If he had known I was alive, he would have used her to break you. He would have, Lorenzo, he would have killed you. He told me that summer on the phone when I begged him to leave us, he said, the day he learned you and I had a child was the day you died in your sleep. So I. You let me bury you. I let you bury me. For 7 years. For 7 years. He took one step into the room. He stopped. He did not touch her. His hands were at his sides and he was not making them be at his sides. They were just at his sides because his body had stopped knowing what to do. And the child is yours. Sophia. Yes. She has my eyes. Yes. He turned his face away. He pressed the side of his closed fist very lightly against the doorframe. His shoulders moved once in a way she understood. She did not touch him. She had not earned yet the right to touch him. After a long moment he turned back. His eyes were wet but his voice was steady. "Why are you here?" he said. "In my house, why now?" "Because 4 months ago," she said, "he found me. He came to my kitchen in Calabria. He sat at my table while she slept upstairs and he told me that I was going to come to your house. And I was going to be invisible for as long as he wanted, and on the night he gave me the signal I was going to put a blade between your ribs while you slept. And if I refused, he was going to take her, and he was going to raise her the way his father raised him." Her voice cracked finally on the last word. "Lorenzo, I came here to kill you. I was going to. Every night there is a knife under the floor in my room. I took it out every night. I held it. I made myself hold it. I was practicing. Elena. And tonight, in the dining room, when she lifted the lid, when I saw what he was going to do, I understood that he was going to do it without me. He was never going to need me. He was going to kill you, and then he was going to kill us anyway, because he would never let your daughter live. And I sent her. I sent our daughter into your dining room to stop the woman my father had paid to kill you, knowing that the moment she opened her mouth, I had failed my father, and my daughter and I were already dead by sunrise." She could not stand any longer. She slid down against the doorframe. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of a man in 20 years, but her hands were over her face and her shoulders were shaking, and the sounds coming out of her throat were the kind of sounds that had been pressed down for 7 years and had finally found a hairline crack. Lorenzo Cattaneo, who had killed 11 men in his life, sat down on the floor of the hallway across from the doorway of her room. He sat down because his legs would not hold him. He sat down with his back against the wall opposite hers, 3 feet away, in the hallway light, and he reached across the 3 feet and laid his hand, palm up, on the floorboard between them. She did not look at it for a long time. When she did, she put her hand into his. He closed his fingers around her hand and brought it very slowly to his mouth, and he pressed his lips against the inside of her wrist where her pulse was, and he breathed in and out 3 times against her skin, and he did not, then, say a single word. That was how he forgave her. The next morning, he made the call. She made it, technically. He stood on the other side of the desk in his second-floor study and watched her face, while she dialed her father from a phone Lorenzo's people had cloned, while 2 of his men stood at the door with their backs to the room. Marchetti picked up on the 3rd ring. He was somewhere with traffic noise behind him. He was, she would learn later, sitting in the back of his car on the BQE, on his way to a meeting in Brooklyn that he was going to walk away from alive. He had, by then, been told that his bodyguard had not made it out of the brownstone. He was, by then, recalculating. "Speak," he said. "It's me," she said. A silence, then, "You disappoint me, Elena." "Camille moved without me. She wasn't supposed to." "Don't lie to me. Your daughter walked across a room and stopped a man from eating. Children don't see what's in a covered dish. You sent her." "Father." Don't call me that. You haven't earned that word. She closed her eyes. She had been preparing for this conversation for 4 months. Lorenzo, watching her face, saw the woman she had become walk back into her own body. I sent her, she said. Yes, I sent her because I changed my mind. I sat in his house for 3 weeks and I watched him and I thought about what kind of man you are and what kind of man he is, and I decided I would rather be his housekeeper than your daughter. I want you to hear that. I want you to remember that I said it. The silence on the other end was the silence of an old animal listening to a sound it has not heard in a very long time. You think he will keep you, Marchetti said, after he finds out who your father is, after he finds out who carried his daughter into his house. You think a man like that is capable of keeping anything that has touched me. I think, she said, that you do not know him, you never did. I will see you again, Elena. No. You will not last a year. Maybe not, but you, father, you will not last a week. She hung up. Her hand on the receiver was trembling. Lorenzo took the phone from her gently. He set it down. He took her by both shoulders and turned her around and folded her into his chest, and she pressed her forehead against his collarbone and breathed in and out, while he put his hand on the back of her head and held her there. Tomas, he said over her head, get me a window, Wednesday. That was Sunday. They had 4 days. He moved her things to the 3rd floor room beside his that afternoon. Sophia, who had been told only that the man with the watch wants to know us, walked into Lorenzo's library the next morning with her storybook under her arm and asked him, with grave courtesy, what his name was. He told her. He sat on the floor of his own library with his back against a bookshelf, a thing none of his men had ever seen him do, and let a 6-year-old in a yellow dress climb into his lap and turn the pages of a book about a fox. Tomas, watching from the doorway, would later say that he had aged 5 years inside that single morning. Sophia, halfway through the book, looked up at him and said severely, Are you my papa? Yes, Lorenzo said. Mama said you were dead. I was, Kara, for a long time. She considered this. Then she put her small hand on his cheek very seriously and said, It's okay. I cried for you a lot when I was 4, but I'm done now. He put his face down into her hair and his shoulders shook once, and Tomas, in the doorway, turned around and walked into the kitchen and stood at the sink and stared out at the back garden for a full minute before he was a man who could be looked at. Mrs. Halloran was at the counter. She offered him tea. He took it. He drank it. He did not, then, know that she had killed his predecessor in 2014 with a different cup of tea, on Marchetti's orders, 2 days before Lorenzo had taken over the family. He did not, then, know much. That afternoon Sophia decided, with no warning and no negotiation, that she wanted a hamster. She told Lorenzo this from on top of his desk, where she had climbed without permission, and where she was now sitting cross-legged among his papers, eating an apple slice. She told him she had named the hamster Beatrice. She told him Beatrice was already a member of the household and that the only thing missing was the actual hamster. She told him that Mama had said no in Calabria, but that Mama had said no when they did not have a house with a back garden, and that they had a back garden now, and therefore the prior reasoning no longer applied. Lorenzo Cattaneo, who had ordered the deaths of 2 men that morning, listened to a 6-year-old's legal argument for a hamster with the gravity of a man hearing a loan request from a foreign government, asked her 3 follow-up questions about Beatrice's intended diet, and told her he would consider it and consult with her mother. Arya, in the doorway, with a stack of folded sheets in her arms, watched the 2 of them, the most feared man in the city, taking notes on a yellow pad about the dietary preferences of an imaginary rodent, and her daughter, who had not, in 7 years, asked any man for anything, and had to lean against the doorframe for a moment, because her chest, after 7 years of being a closed room, had just become a window. Beatrice arrived on Tuesday morning, so did the deadline. Marchetti gave Arya the deadline by a coded text to a phone she had reported clean to Lorenzo and which he had let her keep. The signal came at 4 in the afternoon. The signal said, Tonight, by dawn, or your daughter does not see her 7th birthday. Marchetti, who knew his daughter had told him on the phone that morning that she had chosen the other man, had decided in his car on the BQE that she had not actually chosen, that she had only postured, that she was a Marchetti, and a Marchetti given a real deadline would always do the family thing in the end. He had also decided, secondarily, that whether or not she did the thing, she had given him a useful test. If Lorenzo was alive at sunrise, the woman had betrayed him in fact. If Lorenzo was dead at sunrise, the woman had merely been confused and could be retrieved. Marchetti was a man who liked clean information. Lorenzo, who had been told all of this by Arya at 5 in the afternoon, who had decided his Wednesday window was holding, had also decided the only thing he could decide. He had told her, "Do it. Come to my room tonight. Bring the knife. Let your father's last useful piece of intel be a wrong one. Let him think until Wednesday morning that he won." "You want me to come into your bedroom," she had said, "with a knife?" "Yes." "And do what?" "Whatever you need to do." "Lorenzo." "I trust you, Alina." "You shouldn't." "I do." So she came. She came at 3 in the morning. The connecting door between her room and his was new. The carpenters had finished it that afternoon. She walked through it on her bare feet. She was wearing a white nightdress. She had in her right hand the small paring knife from the kitchen of a small white house in Calabria. She crossed the dark room. She stopped at the side of his bed. He was lying on his back with his eyes closed. She knew, from the way his breath was patterned, that he was not asleep. She knelt beside the bed. She lifted the blade. She set the point of it against his ribs on the left side, 2 inches below his heart, where she had been told by the man who had trained her a single time, 12 years before, in a cold room in Calabria, was the place to put a blade if you wanted to be sure. He opened his eyes. "Tell me," she said quietly, "tell me why I shouldn't." It was the question of the whole story. It was the question she had been asking him on a balcony in Naples 7 years earlier, in a different language with a different mouth. Tell me why I shouldn't run. It was the question her father had failed to answer for her whole life. Tell me why I shouldn't despise you. It was the question she had been asking herself in the dark every night for 11 nights. Tell me why I shouldn't do this and free my daughter. She pressed the blade, just slightly. She felt his skin give. She did not let it break. He looked up at her in the dark. He did not move. "Because I am her father," he said. She made a sound. It was not a word. "And because," he said, "I am yours, Alina, if you'll have me." The blade fell out of her hand onto the floor. It landed on the rug beside the bed with a small, soft sound. She climbed up onto the bed and onto him, and she pressed her face into the side of his throat, and his arms came up around her, and he held her. He held her with the whole grip of his body, both hands flat against her back, his face in her hair, and he did not let go for a very long time. "I had a knife under your floor," she said, into his neck. "I know. I held it every night. I know. Lorenzo. I know, Alina. I know. She lifted her head. She kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It was the kiss of a woman who had spent 7 years drowning and had, finally, been pulled back to the surface by the only hand in the world that had ever fit hers. He kissed her back. The hand at the back of her head was shaking. The hand at her waist was not. They did not, that night, do anything except hold on. She slept against him for the first time in 7 years and 4 months, and at some point in that long, quiet darkness, he turned his face down to her hair and said, very softly, the name he had not said out loud since 2018. She heard it in her sleep and her body, all the way down to her bones, finally believed him. The next morning was Wednesday. Wednesday was Marchetti's restaurant in Bensonhurst. He did not know that. He was, by then, sitting in his Brooklyn mansion at 9 in the morning, drinking espresso and waiting for confirmation that Lorenzo Cattaneo had been found dead in his bed by the housekeeper. The housekeeper was supposed to call the police a half hour after she found him, and the soldiers Marchetti had positioned in the city were supposed to move on the brownstone the moment that call hit the wire. Marchetti was a precise man. He waited. The morning passed. The confirmation did not come. At 11, he made his second espresso. At noon, he walked out to his car. At 1, he was in Bensonhurst, at the small Italian restaurant his father had bought in 1972, sitting at his usual table in the back, eating linguine, alone except for his driver. He had been doing this for 30 years. He had been doing it because no one had ever been stupid enough to come for him there. 2 men came for him there. He never saw them. He stood up at 3:16 in the afternoon, walked across the empty parking lot to his Cadillac, and put his hand on the door handle. The first round entered him under the ear and exited above his right cheekbone. He was dead before his hand left the handle. The second round, fired half a second later, was for the driver, who had drawn his weapon a beat too slow. By the time the first siren reached the parking lot, the rifle had been disassembled in a black duffel bag on the back seat of a Honda crossing the Verrazano, and the 2 men were 10 miles south, with a clean change of clothes, eating sandwiches in a park. Lorenzo was in his study when the call came in. He listened. He nodded once. He hung up the phone. He walked across the hall to the 3rd-floor bedroom. Arya was sitting on the bed, fully dressed, her back very straight. She had not been told. She had known anyway. He had seen the previous night that she would always know. He stood in the doorway. "It's done," he said. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "Are you all right?" He almost laughed. He had not that morning expected her to ask him that. He came into the room. He sat on the bed beside her. He took her hand. He looked at the lines of her palm. "He was a man I have wanted dead since I was 27 years old," he said. "And I will never tell our daughter what I just did. I am all right, Alina. Are you?" She did not answer that either. She lifted his hand and pressed it against her cheek, and they sat like that for a long time, and he understood that there are some questions for which the only honest answer is not yet. Ask me in a year. Ask me when our daughter is 12. Ask me the night you find me crying in the kitchen for no reason. That was when the kitchen door, 2 floors below them, opened. Mrs. Halloran had been told, 8 minutes earlier, by a man with a Genoa accent, that Vincenzo Marchetti was dead in a parking lot in Bensonhurst, and that her contract was now to be executed at her own discretion, and that her targets were no longer the principal but the principal's family. She had not asked which family member. She had understood. She had been waiting 19 years for this moment, the way a cook waits for a sauce, with patience and a wooden spoon. She had set the kettle on the burner. She had ground the chamomile, and from the small brown glass bottle in the back of her apron pocket, the same brown glass bottle Sophia had seen 4 days earlier, because Sophia had been observing the wrong woman by 20 feet, and the maid had only ever been the decoy. She had measured out 3 drops into a small porcelain teacup with pink flowers around the rim. Sophia liked the cup with the flowers. Mrs. Halloran knew that. Mrs. Halloran knew everything about Sophia. Mrs. Halloran had been buttering Sophia's toast for 3 weeks. Mrs. Halloran was, at the moment Arya sat on her bed pressing Lorenzo's hand against her cheek, lifting the small porcelain cup off the saucer and turning toward the back staircase to take it up to the child. She did not make it past the kitchen doorway. What stopped her was that she found, between her body and the staircase, a 68-year-old woman in a navy coat who had let herself into the back garden 3 minutes earlier with a key Lorenzo's mother had given her in 2005. Mrs. DeLuca did not say anything. She did not need to. She had a small black handgun in her right hand, a thing Mrs. Halloran had never seen on her in 19 years of working in the same kitchen, and she had her left hand held out, palm up, for the cup. Mrs. Halloran looked at her for a long second. Then, very quietly, she said, "Margarita." "Set it down, Niam." "You knew." "For 19 years. And you let me. I let you stay where I could see you." Mrs. Halloran's mouth twitched. It was, for a moment, the smile of a much younger woman. "Tell him," she said, "that his mother was the best of you. Tell him I am sorry, I always was." She dropped the cup. The cup shattered on the kitchen tile. The tea ran across the grout in a small dark line. Mrs. Halloran reached with her right hand into the apron pocket where the bottle had been. She did not get there. Mrs. DeLuca shot her once, in the chest, at a distance of 4 feet. The sound went through the house like a struck bell. By the time Lorenzo and Arya had reached the kitchen, Mrs. DeLuca was sitting at the small breakfast table with her hands folded in her lap, the gun on the wood in front of her, looking at the body on the floor with an expression that was not satisfaction and not regret. It was the expression of a woman who has finally, after 19 years, set down a heavy bag. Arya stopped in the kitchen doorway. She put her hand against the frame. She said, "Mrs. DeLuca." Mrs. DeLuca looked up. Her face did something Arya had not seen on it before. It cracked, just slightly, the way old leather cracks. She did not stand up. She said very quietly, "Sit down, dear." "Both of you, Lorenzo, sit. I have something to give you that I have been carrying for 19 years, and I am too tired to carry it for one more day." They sat. She reached into the inside pocket of her navy coat. She did not take out a paper. She did not take out a photograph. She took out a small, folded square of pale yellow stationery, the kind of stationery a woman in 2006 would have written a letter on. She unfolded it. She looked at it, and her old hands, which had not shaken when she had shot a woman 4 feet away, shook then. She set the letter on the table in front of Lorenzo. She put her hand over his hand, briefly, and then took her hand away. "Your mother wrote this in the hospital," she said. "6 days before she died, she made me promise 3 things. The first was that I would tell you when the time came that she had read your letters from Naples that summer. The second was that I would never tell you she had read them. I am breaking that one now. The third is what is in this letter. Read it, my darling. I will sit here. Read it slowly. I will not interrupt you." The letter was 3 paragraphs long. It was written in a thin, slanting hand. Lorenzo read it. Arya beside him did not read it. It was not for her. She watched his face. She watched his face go from the face of the man she had married last night, in a sense in the dark, to the face of a 19-year-old boy she had never met, the boy his mother had written this letter to, who had not been allowed to read it in 2006 because his mother had not wanted to make the decision for him. The decision, in the letter, was this: that his mother had met the girl on the balcony in Naples, that the girl had not known who she was either, that his mother had asked her old friend Margherita DeLuca to find the girl if she ever surfaced, and that, if Lorenzo loved her still, on the day she came home, his mother wanted him to know that she had loved her too, that she had thought of her as a daughter from the only afternoon they had ever spent together, and that he had her permission, posthumous and complete, to forgive the girl, whatever she had done in the years in between, because the years in between had been done to her, not by her. Lorenz did not look up from the letter for a long time. Arya put her hand on his back between his shoulder blades and left it there. She did not say anything. She had learned, over a long and complicated life, when not to speak. "Margherita," Lorenzo said finally. How much of this was you?" The old woman lifted her chin. "All of it, my darlings, the bringing her home, the handling, the letters every month, the telephone." "And how much of it was her?" Mrs. DeLuca looked at him. She looked at him for so long that he raised his eyes from the letter to meet hers. When she answered, her voice was very gentle. "My darling," she said, "I am an old woman in Queens. I do not have the reach to fake a death in Liguria, intercept a kidnapping in Calabria, replace a courier in Naples, pay a chef in Brooklyn, and raise your daughter to know what a brown glass bottle looks like before her 7th year. I had a key to your back garden and a phone in my apron and a promise to a woman who has been dead for 20 years. The rest of what kept you alive sat next to you on this bench and is currently holding the back of your shirt in her fist." Arya, who had not realized her hand had moved from his back to his shirt, looked down at her own hand. Lorenzo turned his face toward her. He did not say anything. He put one hand on the side of her face. He turned back to Mrs. DeLuca. "You will eat dinner in this house every Sunday for the rest of your life," he said. "Yes, my darling." "You will be at her 7th birthday." "Yes." "And every birthday after." "Yes." "And you will tell my daughter, when she is older, that she had 3 grandmothers who loved her, and that she will only meet 2 of them in stories." "Yes," Mrs. DeLuca said, and her old face did, finally, what it had not done in front of him before, which was crumple. "Yes, my darling, I will tell her." She stood up. She kissed Arya once on the forehead, the way Arya's mother had never kissed her. She kissed Lorenzo once on the temple, the way Lorenzo's mother had used to kiss him in 2005. She walked out the back door into the garden. She closed the door behind her. She did not come into the house again until Sophia's 7th birthday, 3 months later, when she would arrive with a wrapped book and stay for cake. And when Sophia, who had been told she had a third grandmother named Margarita, would climb into her lap during the cake cutting and demand to know whether Beatrice the hamster could come live in Astoria for a weekend. Because Beatrice, Sophia had decided, needed to see other parts of the city. Mrs. DeLuca, who had killed a woman in this same house 3 months earlier, would say, gravely, that Beatrice was welcome in Astoria any weekend Beatrice's mother permitted. Arya, watching from the kitchen doorway, would put her hand over her own mouth, because the room would have, in that moment, 3 generations of women who were supposed to be dead by then, and it was almost too much to hold. But that was 3 months later. That was Wednesday. Lorenzo sat at the breakfast table with the letter folded between his palms for a long time after Mrs. DeLuca had gone. The body had been removed. The grout had been cleaned. The kitchen was empty except for the 2 of them. Elena. My mother loved you. I know, Lorenzo. You know. She did not look at him for a moment, then she did. She came up to the balcony the 3rd afternoon. You had gone to get cigarettes. We sat together for 45 minutes. She did not tell me her name. She told me she was a friend of yours. She made me tell her my favorite color and how my mother had taught me to fold sheets. When she stood up to leave, she put her hand on my hair, the way an aunt would, and she said, "I think my son is going to be very lucky." I never saw her again. I thought for 7 years that I had imagined her. When Mrs. DeLuca first contacted me, 3 weeks after my father's man came to my kitchen in Calabria, she said only, "My darling, your mother-in-law sends her love." I knew then that I had not imagined her. That was the moment I understood I might survive. He bent his head. He kissed the back of her hand. "I owe her my life," he said. "You owe your mother your life," Arya said. "Margarita just used her hands." He laughed. It was a small, surprised, almost unrecognizable sound, the laugh of a man who had not been allowed to laugh in 19 years. He put his face down against her shoulder. He stayed there. After a moment, her hand came up and into his hair. That was Wednesday. The brownstone was quiet by sundown. The 4 months that followed were not soft months. A man like Vincenzo Marchetti does not die in a parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon without consequence. His soldiers fractured. Some came to Lorenzo. Some did not. There were nights when Arya sat at the 3rd-floor window with a small dark gun in her lap and watched the street, while Sophia slept in the next room, while Lorenzo was out in the city making sure the borders held. There were nights when he came home with a bruise on his jaw and a stiffness in his shoulder and a dead look in his eyes, and she did not ask. There were nights when she had nightmares about a small white kitchen in Calabria and woke up with her hand around an imaginary blade and could not remember, for one terrible second, where she was. He would put his face into her hair and say her name, her real name, the one only he and Mrs. DeLuca were permitted to use, until she remembered. There were also other nights. Nights when Sophia, who had taken to calling him Papa with the small, grave courtesy of a child who has decided to grant a great gift, fell asleep in his lap on the couch in the library with Beatrice the hamster running in a plastic ball across the rug at their feet, and Arya sat across from them with a book she was not reading. Nights when Sophia, who had decided that her father was, in fact, a piece of furniture installed for her convenience, would burst into the 3rd-floor bedroom at 6 in the morning in her pajamas demanding to know whether today was the day she could finally have a kitten in addition to Beatrice, because Beatrice was lonely, and would receive, from a man who had, the previous evening, ordered 3 deaths. A serious negotiation about whether kittens and hamsters could cohabit, ending in a compromise about a goldfish. Nights when Arya would walk into his study at midnight in his shirt, with 2 glasses of wine, and sit on the edge of his desk and drink with him until the city outside the windows had gone quiet. Nights when she would catch him watching her across the table at dinner, with an expression she had not known a man's face could make, and she would set down her fork and put her hand over her own mouth and have to leave the room for a minute, because being looked at like that, after 7 years of not being looked at all, was something her body had to relearn how to survive. He married her on a Tuesday in February, in the library, with Sophia in a small white dress holding 2 rings in a velvet box and Tomas and Mrs. DeLuca standing as witnesses, and Beatrice in her cage on a side table, because Sophia had insisted Beatrice be present. There was no priest. There was no signature on any government paper, because the woman whose hand he was holding still officially did not exist. He gave her a ring he had made by a jeweler on 47th Street, an antique gold setting with a small dark sapphire, because he had remembered, after 7 years, that she had once told him on a balcony that she did not like diamonds. She wore that ring every day for the rest of her life. That night, when the library was empty and the city was deep into the kind of quiet that only February can produce, he stood with her at the window of the third-floor bedroom and looked down at the snow on East 73rd Street. He had her hand in his hand. She had her head against his shoulder. Sophia was asleep in the next room. The connecting door was open. "Elena," he said. I want to tell you something. I want you to hear it. I'm not going to make it a long speech. I tried that one already and it sounded like I had written it down." She laughed against his shoulder. "I went to bed in this room for 9 years," he said. "I went to bed thinking about a girl who was supposed to be dead. I built an empire on top of that bed. I bought this house. I made my men afraid of me. I made my enemies afraid of me. None of it tasted like anything, none of it. I want you to understand. I came home every night and the room was empty, and I learned, slowly, the way a man learns a thing he is too tired to stop learning, that an empire built on an empty room is just a larger empty room." She did not interrupt him. "The night you walked back into this house," he said, "I felt my own pulse for the first time in 9 years. I want you to know that. I want you to know that I will be patient. I will be slow. I will wait at any door you ask me to wait at for any length of time. I will not rush you. I am not gentle, Elena. I never was. I do not know if I can be. But for you I am willing to learn. That is what I have. That is what I am offering. The rest we will figure out." She lifted her head. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was smiling. "Lorenzo," she said. "Yes." "Shut up and come to bed." He did. Sophia woke at 2 in the morning, padded into their room in her bare feet, climbed up between them without ceremony, said, "I had a bad dream about a fox," fell back asleep against her father's chest, and did not move for the rest of the night. Arya, watching them across the pillow in the dim light, with her husband's arm around their daughter and their daughter's small fist closed around the lapel of his pajama shirt, understood, finally, fully, in a way she had not understood at the wedding or in the doorway or in the dark with the blade, that the 7 years were over. Not in the sense that they had not happened, in the sense that they had finally finished happening to her. She was on the other side of them. She could put them down. She did. She slept. 28 years later, on a Tuesday in October, in the same third-floor bedroom of the same brownstone on the same East 73rd Street, Lorenzo Cattaneo, who was 62, who had retired from the family 2 years earlier, who had high blood pressure and a bad knee and a granddaughter named Margarita who was 3 years old, and demanded to be carried up the stairs by him and only him, sat on the edge of the bed and took off his watch and laid it on the nightstand. His wife came out of the bathroom in her dressing gown. Her hair was white at the temples now. She had a small scar at her hairline that he had spent 30 years pretending not to look at, because she had not told him in 30 years where it came from, and he had decided in 30 years that he did not need to know. She came around the bed. She sat down beside him. She took his hand. She turned it over in hers and looked, the way she had looked once on a balcony in Naples and once in a hallway on a 4th floor, at the lines of his palm. "Lorenzo," she said. I was going to do it, that night." He turned his head slowly to look at her. He had not in 28 years asked her about the night with the knife. She had not in 28 years talked about it. "I came into your room," she said, "and I put the blade against your ribs and I asked you the question, and Lorenz, I have to tell you, I was going to do it. If you had given me any other answer, if you had said you loved me, if you had begged, if you had told me what I meant to you, if you had said anything that sounded like a man trying to save himself, I would have pushed the blade in. I had decided, on the way down the hall. I had decided because I thought any other answer was a lie, and I was tired of being lied to. The only thing in the world that stopped my hand was that you said the true thing, because I am her father. I want you to know. I want you to know that you said the only sentence that could have kept you alive." He was quiet for a long time. He was looking at her face, and she was looking back, and the lamp on the nightstand was making a small, warm circle on the bedspread between them. "Alina," he said. "Yes." "I knew." She blinked. "I knew," he said. "I knew the moment I felt the knife. I was awake when you came through the door. I had been awake for an hour. I was not afraid, Alina. I was waiting. I had decided on the floor of that hallway the night before that if you put the blade in, I would let you. I had earned it. I had let you bury yourself for 7 years to keep me safe, and I had never come to look for you. I had believed a photograph. I had paid a man 50,000 euros to confirm it. I had not deserved you, Alina. Not for a long time. So I lay in that bed and I waited for the blade, and I thought, if she does it, then she does it, and I will at least have died being seen by the only person who ever saw me. And then you asked me the question, and I told you the only true thing I had left, and you put the knife down." She had her hand over her mouth. "You let me," she whispered. "Yes." "Lorenzo." "I would do it again," he said. "Tonight, tomorrow, any night you needed, I would always do it again." She made a sound. It was the same sound she had made in the doorway 30 years earlier. It was the sound of a woman whose body has finally believed something it had been trying not to believe for half a lifetime. She put her face into his chest. He folded his arms around her. He put his cheek down on the top of her white hair. The connecting door beyond them was open. It had been open for 30 years. Down the hall in a small guest room, their granddaughter was asleep on a pillow shaped like a fox. In the kitchen below, a kettle Mrs. Halloran had once owned was on a shelf in a cabinet, never used. In a drawer in the desk in the second-floor study, in a velvet pouch, was a small paring knife from a small white kitchen in Calabria, which Arya had never thrown away, because a woman does not throw away the object that almost made her into something she did not want to be. She keeps it, in a velvet pouch, in a drawer, where she can remember on certain anniversaries what the weight of it was, and what hand had refused, in the end, to use it. And in a wooden frame on Arya's nightstand, beside the lamp, in a hand that had been still for 30 years, was a folded square of pale yellow stationery, 3 paragraphs long, that Arya read once a year on the anniversary of her mother-in-law's death, to remind herself that she had been welcomed into this family by a woman she had only met for 45 minutes on a balcony in Naples, and that grace, sometimes, comes not from the hand you expect, but from the hand you have already forgotten was reaching toward you. "I love you," she said into his chest. "I have loved you every day for 37 years. I know. I want you to outlive me, Lorenzo. I don't want to be the one who stays. I know, Alina. Promise me." He did not answer. He did not promise. He held her tighter, and after a moment she understood, and she did not ask again, because she had married a man who did not lie to her, not even in the dark, not even at 62. Not even when the lie would have been a kindness. He turned out the lamp. They lay down. She put her hand, palm flat, over his heart. He put his hand over hers. The brownstone around them was quiet the way it had been quiet on the first night she had ever stood inside it, holding her daughter's hand on a 4th-floor landing, listening to the sound of a man she had loved for 7 years coming up the stairs 3 flights below. The same house. The same dark. The same heart under her palm. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she would wake before he did. She would put on her dressing gown. She would go down to the kitchen. She would make coffee in the small Italian pot he had bought her in their first year. She would take it back upstairs on a tray. She would sit on the edge of the bed and she would say his name, softly, the way she had said it for 30 years, and he would open his eyes and look at her, and she would hand him the cup, and he would take it, and that would be the rest of their life. The Mafia boss who had terrified Manhattan, in the end, was not the most dangerous person in his own house. The most dangerous person in his own house was a 6-year-old girl in a yellow dress, who had walked across a dining room one cold blue Friday in October with her hand behind her back, and put her small palm on a man's sleeve, and whispered the 4 words that had unmade and remade them all. "Don't eat that, sir." The second most dangerous was the woman who had raised her. The third was the man who, 30 years after a Tuesday in October, would still wake at 3 in the morning sometimes, in the dark, and reach across the bed, just to make sure she was still there, still breathing, still, after everything, his. She always was.